Hello and a very good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for coming over. I know it is the last session, and I hope you've had great learning experiences. There are a lot of familiar faces that I see. So this is my second year at LASCON actually, and I'm absolutely thrilled and truly honored to be here, to be very frank. Arun already gave my introduction, so probably I can skip that or maybe cover it a little bit. But today, the topic that we're going to cover is not something that you would not have heard of before. Of course, I'm sure that given that this is the last session, you have definitely heard about cyber, supply chain, cybersecurity, right? So what are we trying to get out from this session? That is to really understand all the concepts. So everything that you might have heard in chunks and pieces, we'll try to probably wrap it up in something more seamless. And it is mainly intended for startups. I don't know if any of you are from startups right now, but this session is mainly for startups. So if you do not have a supply chain security program, you can get at least few steps where you can get started. It doesn't require a lot of money. And that is my intent, to help everybody out with my session. And again, Arun already gave my introduction, so thank you for that. But for people who just came in, Akanksha, Pathak, senior consultant at Visa. I work for third-party cybersecurity. And my job essentially is to ensure that all the big or small companies who want to work with Visa, they are secure. And any attacks on their environment doesn't laterally move to ours. That is the gist of it. So that's about me. I just want to know a little bit about who you all are. So I know the people over here, but how many of you are developers? Okay. You too? Okay, that's awesome. Anybody who's a lot of security professionals? Anybody? Okay, awesome. Anybody who's working at startup right now? I'm assuming you. Okay, good. I have something for you. And by any chance, C-suite executives in the room? Okay, I just wanted to gauge the pressure that I'm going to face. But good to know. All right. So we are going to talk about supply chain security. So what is supply chain security? You all know that. But one thing that we probably forget, whenever we talk about security, we always talk about, okay, we need to update our softwares. We need to have our network hardened so that nobody can enter into our environment. Yes. And this is all great. And I would want to say that we all are actually doing pretty good at it day by day. And we see that all the suppliers, all the vendors that I work with, they are definitely having better practices nowadays. So what is the problem? The problem is that this is an interconnected world, and we are unfortunately still a very small part of this larger ecosystem. What does that mean? If something happens outside, it will directly or indirectly impact us. So we are using cloud providers, we are working with third-party contractors, we are using tools outside of what is built in-house. So yes, supply chain is there. So what is supply chain security? In a very simplistic statement is, you need to know what are the external components that you're using, and you need to know, and you need to make sure that all those components are secure. That is the bottom line of any supply chain security. But, even now when I work with vendors, it is surprising to see, even today, in the world today, they do not want to adhere to a lot of your supply chain, and not just supply chain, even security best practices. And I am not even talking about startups here. I'm talking about the big giants. And I am not surprised when there's a zero-day attack happens and some big company is impacted, because some way or the other, when I have looked into that, it was deemed to happen. But they think it will not happen to us until it really do. So from startups' perspective, the way startups work is a little bit different. Like, the focus is not security, obviously, unless you're a security company. But the focus is we need to innovate, we need to grow, we need to move faster. And all of this has to be done with limited resources, limited budget, limited workforce, and limited time. So we understand that. But while we understand that, hackers do that too. What does that mean? Startups are at the biggest risk because everybody who wants to actually attack, let's say Visa, they'll try to get through startups because they know that their security controls might not be as amazing, I would say, as Visa's. So why do startups really care? Because that's not something that, it's directly coming to you, but somehow it does. Because if an attack happens, yes, companies like Visa will be impacted, but you know what happens with the startups? They go on the verge of bankruptcy. And you don't want that to happen. There is definitely a financial risk involved, but that financial risk has a lot of other things. So if an attack happens, you'll have to invest in some kind of forensic analysis to know where the attack has happened, what has happened, what are the logs. You have to give all the information to all your clients. That's number one. But at the same time, you will lose your customer trust, reputational damage, and you know how difficult sometimes it is to build back your reputation. So, of course, obviously, you all know why you want to invest in some kind of supply chain security. So this is something that you know, but even now, if you're not doing a supply chain security program, you probably will have to, because there are a lot of regulatory compliances. So all these attacks, if you remember Log4j, I've heard in almost every session, Log4j, Moveit, Polyfill, all these vulnerabilities, when they came out, they affected companies globally. And what happened? Because of that, government said that supply chain is important, and suddenly the demand skyrocketed. And that is why there were a lot of government obligations that we now have to follow. So there was one in the US that you might have heard about, the Executive Order 14028, that says that it was intended to make the nationwide cybersecurity better. But what it said was that as a part, if you are a company who is working with any kind of federal agency, then you have to comply to certain supply chain requirements. And those requirements includes a lot of things. Two clauses were you need to give the SBOM. And the second, SBOM we'll cover. I'm sure you would have heard that before. But you have to give SBOM to the organizations. And the second is you have to adhere to the supply chain frameworks. That also we'll cover. So those were the two requirements in the US. If you're in US, so you know if this is something that is asked from Visa, it is also going to trickle down to you, because there was also one clause that said that you have to self-attest all the components that are used in your software. So softwares that are not written by Visa, it is not going to self-attest. It is going to come from their vendors. And that is how it is going to come to you, now or later. And not just US, I think it's also in Europe. So there was a Cyber Resilience Act that was passed, and it said that all the manufacturers who are working in the Europe region, they have to produce an SBOM for both their hardware and software inventories, which means they need more security and they need more transparency. So one idea that is, I want to make sure that everybody is clear about, supply chain security is all about transparency. That is what everybody wants. They want visibility, because only once everything is visible and clear, they can take action. And the action needs to be taken really, really fast. So that's the intent. All right, so now I think you've understood what and why. Let's start talking about the main part, and that is how do you do that? So let's take a real life example. There was a recent vulnerability that came out. It was in a tool called Palo Alto Expedition. Anybody heard about that? Palo Alto Expedition vulnerability? Yes, Catherine did. So what happened? So Expedition is basically, it's a tool that is used to automate the migration of Palo Alto's firewall. So essentially, again, just in very simple terms, to maintain a Palo Alto's firewall, sometimes you can use Expedition tool as well. So let's take a scenario where Visa, my company, it wants to send all its star employees to LASCON, because it wants that you should become security. You should have a lot of security awareness. So they send us to LASCON, and for that it collects the PII information. So it'll collect our name, email, phone, so that they can register into the LASCON app, right? And then it'll send it to the LASCON, and then you'll have tickets and all that good stuff. Now imagine that LASCON is at the back end is using firewall, and this firewall is being maintained by Expedition. What happens? Of course, you know. So usually here there was a remote code execution that could actually get information from your database. So here it means that Visa's employees' PII information might be leaked because they came and they worked here. So I don't know if any one of you attended my session from last year, but I talked about how simply you can maintain your asset management list, which basically means for every vendor, you should have some kind of software and hardware inventory that says what do they use. So how do you maintain it? It can be a simple Excel sheet or a Google sheet, Excel or a Google sheet. So I was talking about that, and that actually brings me to step number 1. Have a list created, and you can call it like a technology and data information list. What it means is you need to know what applications do your vendors use. Now you can create 2 lists. One can be a standard list. So standard lists can be like the common tools that usually every organization or every application use, like what are the routers, switches do you use, what firewall do you use, what logging tool, SIEM tool do you use, what do you use for scanning. So all that good things, which you can easily obtain if you have their audit report. So you have, like if you have the SOC mentions what tools that organization uses in general. So that can be a standard list. The second can be or should be a specific application list. So I have a lot of my architecture team over here, and what we do as a part of our assessment, we ask the vendor about how do you go about saving our data. So that is what the specific list need to have. What data? So in this LASCON app, you need to know I have 20 employees that I'm sending, so 20 PII information stored where? Let's say they're using Amazon, let's say it's an S3, so it's an S3. Where is it going through? Okay, it's passing through a firewall. Is there any other application? So now you're creating a list for your particular application and the scope wherever your data is stored. So have that list handy and try to ask them, again, not always possible, but try to ask them that when was the last update or what is the version of the application that version of the tool that you are using. Now, as I said, not always. Many times it happens that when you ask your vendor, they're like, I'm sorry, we are not going to provide you any information because it's usually sensitive. And that brings me to step number 2, and that is have some kind of contractual obligation. So I know that most of the standard contracts have this clause of having or collecting the audit documents like SOC 2, PCI, great stuff. So keep having that. But now, given that supply chain is going to be a requirement, start from now. So start adding the security clauses in your contract that because of, let's say, federal requirement, we have to provide any kind of SBOM list, then you'll have to provide that to us as well. So have all those supply chain requirements listed in your contract as well, because that's honestly the only way how you can make them provide you what you need. Okay, so now this is easy part. It's not easy, but still easy to understand. We start going into a little bit more details. And it becomes slightly trickier. So usually when you see any kind of attacks that are happening, it doesn't always happen on an application. It happens on libraries, some kind of component that is within your software. And that is why everybody is talking about creating an SBOM database. There was somebody in an earlier session, and I heard the question was that why do we need SBOM data? I don't see him here, but I want to answer that question maybe a little later. But you need an SBOM database. I'll tell you what SBOM is, but you need an SBOM database because you need to know which components are there in your software. Dependencies within dependencies within dependency. I know that was a question you asked as well. So we're going to cover that. But that brings me to step number 3. But before that, I want to explain when people talk about dependencies just from development perspective. Usually what happens is, actually this was an analogy that I heard. Yes.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
So So before that, so we're talking about supply chain, right?
Yes.
I totally understand about SBOMs.
Uh-huh.
But the second part of it is talking about WAF and all the other
Yes.
stuff, right? That's actually leaking, like how I'm going to store the data. So you're right now asking a vendor about inner workings of my services and
Yes.
application.
Yes.
Which is also, there is a risk involved in there, right?
Yes.
So how are you tackling that?
So good question. And that is exactly the kind of arguments that we get, but our assess. So again, a lot of people are preaching security with obscurity. Like if we do not tell you what information is inside our environment, you would not know. But that's not always true. And that is why what we say is, if my data is within S3, whichever S3 instance it is, I just need to know this particular box from inside till in the internet, what controls do you have? We don't care what other application, what other data you have, but for my data, because I care about my customers' data, you will have to provide that information to us. And of course, it is kept confidential, so we have NDAs and everything signed, and we show you that how we put it in a way that it cannot be going out of Visa's environment, and there are some liability clause on that as well. Like if I by any chance leak your data, then there are liability clauses on Visa as well. But all of that is kept in mind. However, we cannot accept the fact, and I think it's not even the industry best practices to keep the fact hidden and saying that, hey, sorry, we cannot give those tools. In fact, when you share the SOC reports, those SOC reports have all those details in that as well, right? And you do share that information with a lot of people. Sometimes they're public, like they just post it. You just go log in and you get the SOC reports, right?
So do you ask specific, like what kind of WAF you're using?
Yes.
Or all we are saying, hey, we are using WAF?
No, we ask specific tools, and that is what we are trying to do. Like have clear transparency of the entire flow, and that's why it was application specific. But yes, we ask which WAF, and sometimes if possible, we ask if you're using a particular server, what version, when was the last patching did you do? So we ask all of that questions. Any other questions? That was a good question. Okay. All right. So yeah, I was talking about SBOM, but to understand SBOM, I wanted to make you understand the development world. Okay. So okay. So if you see, how does a developer work? A developer writes a source code, written the source code, and it pulls in some dependencies from the internet, and then it combines and builds it into a software, which is then packaged into an application and goes to production, right? But if you look at this dependency box, it's actually way bigger than what it looks like right now. Usually, the source code is only 5 to 10% of the entire software. And a lot is dependent on the dependencies written by somebody who you don't even know. So that is why you need to have some kind of visibility. Specifically for open source, when we say that we're using some dependencies, we need to know a lot of information about that before we use that. So coming to something that I already talked about, SBOM, not a real bomb, it's software bill of materials. So in SBOM, again, I'm sure that you would have heard about SBOM already multiple times. But SBOM is essentially, it's a database. It's a machine-readable, detailed inventory of all the software components for the software bill of material, all the software components that would go, and you can look through it. It's kind of a table, kind of a database. So how it actually looks in tools, I took an example of ServiceNow just to show you what's an SBOM. SBOM is literally this. So you have the name of the components. So you have an application. In that application, there are some components. It can be anything. It can be a library. It can be a firmware. It can be literally anything, any dependency it could be. And then you talk about what version it is, the license, the URL, and all of that. And then if you double click on this component, then you can see the further components. So there was a question you asked, does it show hierarchical dependencies, right? Long time back in one of the sessions.
The question was, you have transient dependencies.
Yes.
So the vulnerability, if the vulnerability exists on these transient dependencies, that's where the real challenge occurs.
Correct.
So if I have a software which didn't have any vulnerabilities 5 years back.
Correct.
And then your transient dependency is going to increase.
Correct.
So one of the dependency has an issue.
Yes.
So at that point of time, it's like, how do I fix it? That's the biggest challenge.
Okay. So he's talking about transient dependencies. So you have dependencies within dependencies, but also when if you look at the software, it might have vulnerabilities right now because of the dependencies that were used before. I'm right? Okay. So first of all, right now there are tools that can pick out dependencies within dependencies, and I'm going to talk about it. But to your question, you have to run it on a regular basis so that everything, all the vulnerabilities that are there, even from the previous dependencies, are all flagged in. So we're going to cover that, but I hope I could answer your question. If I don't, please let me know towards the end of the session. Okay, so now from a startup's perspective, it's like, okay, we know what is an SBOM. How do we start? I want to start my program today. What do I do? So the Department of Commerce, basically the government, they defined 7 minimum elements that should be in the SBOM. It's of course supply name component, the version, the time stamping, if it is related or dependent on any other dependency. So that's a dependency relationship and who has written the SBOM. There's also something called unique identifier, which says if you want to classify or find where is this particular BOM entity. So for example, if you want to relate that this particular component is maybe a part of something in the database, so you can have like a lookup key for that. So that is like what a unique identifier is. Okay, so you've understood how a BOM looks like. You understood what are the fields that you need. Now, to produce SBOM, there are few industry-wide formats. One is CycloneDX, and the other one is SPDX. There are more formats as well that are available, but these are industry-wide. So if you've created one, you can share it with the other vendors or your clients as well. Okay, so CycloneDX was developed by OWASP Foundation itself, and its intention was mainly security. So use case was security and how to have or analyze your supply chain components. That was the main intent, and that is why, if you look from security's perspective, people use CycloneDX format more and more. And again, if you look at this is basically a JSON script. So you can have these formats in JSON, XML, any kind of machine-readable format, basically. So this is a CycloneDX, and then the second one is SPDX. This was built by Linux Foundation, and the intent over there was mainly licensing compliance. So they wanted to know any kind of open source tools if you're using, what is a license, it should not cause any kind of legal obligations. But having said that, SPDX is like, again, most widely adopted format because the larger companies, they use SPDX. So if you want to share or integrate with them, people try to use SPDX. But you have tools that can generate SBOM in any format you like, and very easily. All right, so you've understood the format, you understood the fields. How do you actually create it? I'm sure my developers in the room know how to create that, but I was talking to a lot of vendors outside, and most of the tools actually can create SBOM. So the good thing is, the tools that you're already using, you can use those tools to produce SBOM. So like if you have any kind of SCA scanning tools to know, just as a part of your application security, you can use those tools as well. So I tried CodeSec SCA tool, and you can just run like a contrast audit command. What it does is, it shows you the components, it shows you the vulnerabilities for each component, and at the end, it'll produce that SBOM list that you can basically share. It's very simple. If you don't have any such tools, then you have open source tools available. There is Sift, Trivi, and the most popular is actually CycloneDX CLI. And this is what can actually produce dependencies within dependencies when you actually try to generate the SBOM. So you have to pass your software the binary files, and then it can pull in and it can show you the BOM entities and the dependencies and the components in it. Now, so you have created the SBOM. What do you do with it? You store it in some kind of database. So you can have tools, but again, from startup's perspective, you need not stick to a particular way or a particular procedure how you want to proceed. You can have your own databases as well. So that brings me to step number 4. You have to store your SBOM somewhere. Just make sure that all those databases are immutable. So like have kind of write once, read many kind of systems. So you can ensure that it is not tampered with. If you don't have, so example is of that might be S3. We were talking about S3. So S3 example can be like you just enable the object lock functionality of that. Also, you can have like JFrog and Git where you can have version control repositories. Whatever database you use, just ensure that it is tamper resistant. So have some kind of cryptographic verifications that are going on that. So now you've stored the databases. What do you do with it? To explain that, I want to again show you ServiceNow. This is the first part. So I showed you the components earlier. This is the application. So let's say you're using a payment gateway application. Okay? This is how it looks like. This is the application. This is the version of that application, description, classifier, because it's an application. Then it talks about how many components this particular application contains, which includes components within components within components. So you can see actually a dependency graph as well. But as well, if you notice here, there is something called vulnerabilities and AVIs. AVIs are basically actionable vulnerabilities. But you see vulnerabilities. And that brings me to step number 5. And that is you need to use that SBOM to track the vulnerabilities and monitor those vulnerabilities. Now, how do you do that? Again, you can have two options. Either you can have a solution that you're building in-house, or you can use open source tools. So what do you do? How do you build a solution in-house? It's honestly not very difficult. This is just a ChatGPT created script. And what I did, I just asked it to create a script where it can match my vulnerabilities of the components with the NVD database. If you look at it at the top, it's just fetching the vulnerabilities from the NVD. It's bringing it at one place. Then it's parsing the Cyclone bomb component so that it can talk about vulnerabilities. And then it's mapping the two. So now you know all the components that are using, which component might be associated with the vulnerability. Of course, you can, modify it and add the version and when you want to run it and all the good stuff. But you can have a script generated. Now use a script and run the script ideally in a CI/CD. So try to run it on a periodic basis. So whenever there's a new build, try to run that script. But if you're not able to do that, try to run that script on some kind of period. So you can run that script sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, depending on how frequent the changes are. Oh, and there was one thing that I forgot to mention. So this SBOM entity was extracted from the softwares that are running within your company. Also ensure, as a part of your contract, you have to collect the SBOM entity. So tell your vendors that, hey, I want to collect the SBOM in the Cyclone DX format. Can you help me get it? So ingest that as well into your database. Have to ensure it's not just the SBOM that is for your organization, but for every organization that you're working with. So that is when it'll give you a holistic SBOM view, I would say. And of course, about running, so of course you have to make sure that you're running that script. If it is not running every time, you're running that script, especially when there's any kind of high-profile vulnerability that comes out. So log4j happened, run that script, see if any kind of version is used in any of your application, and you know that you need to action on it. If not, I think you're good. So this is a little resource intensive. Somebody will have to build this script. If you don't want to do that, you can use open source software. One of the most popular one is the dependency track, again provided by OWASP. This dependency track does all of that. So everything that I was talking about, right? Take the database, talk to NVD, and see what vulnerabilities are out there. It does all of that, but there are, of course, added functionalities, and this is growing. It is an amazing tool. There are so many other functionalities, but the good one is it also gives, so first of all, it scans on a periodic basis, and it also can give you alerts. So if there is something critical that has happened or a high-profile vulnerability comes out, it actually can give you alerts. So that is why it's recommended to use open source tools. But of course, if there are any blockers, then you are free to have your own script. But do something about it, okay? And either you're using dependency track or your script, please, please, please integrate into your CI/CD pipeline. What it means is, so if you're using dependency track, it's pretty easy. You just have to invoke the dependency check, and you build it in your, and then you build, and then you create it in your pipeline, and then it'll run every time you're making any changes or you're modifying any kind of dependency. So please, if you can, integrate into your CI/CD pipeline because it reduces the manual intervention like a lot. And of course, you have to do continuous monitoring. All these tools help you do that. But there's just one point that I wanted to add in continuous monitoring. Ensure that you have some kind of audit logs. So you have the SBOM, you're relying on that SBOM, great. But make sure that this, as we were talking about, right, the integrity is very important. So ensure there's some kind of audit logs that are happening to track if there are any changes to the SBOM. Who changed it? When did it change? Have that so that you know not just your components, but your SBOM in general is all nice and good to use. Now there are certain cases where the automatic function doesn't work. Like number one is like your legacy applications. So for legacy applications, you can run like DAS tools to see what are the components that you're using maybe sometimes, and then you'll have to manually ingest that. So sometimes for some systems, you would have to use like the manual dependency management, and you have lot of the tools that can do that. So I would say when you're beginning to build your program, it's okay if, let's say, your legacy application is not reachable or it's absolutely separated. It's fine to not begin with adding the manual dependency step. But once your program matures, ensure that you imbibe that step as well. Okay, I think these were the essential steps of like how to go about it when you're talking about supply chain security. But there are a few things that I want to talk about when we talk about supply chain or SBOM in mind. Number one is ensuring integrity and authenticity that I already talked about. So of course you're using hashing, SHA-256, 5112, whatever. So you are of course using that for integrity, but there are other tools that are available out there that can help you with that. Lots of organizations like Google and many others came to build this SIG store. And what it essentially does is you have written a component and you can sign that component using those tools. So just like how HTTP was a norm and then everybody shifted to HTTPS, the new norm is that every component, especially the open source components that are using, it should be signed by some kind of authority. And how to do that? SIG store is usually what most of them use. So if you look at this is something that was available on their website. But if you look at this, there are basically three tools that are out here. This part is the cosign. So cosign is one tool. The other one is Fulcio. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. If I'm not, let me know. But the other tool is called Fulcio, Fulcio. And this part is record. So what it does is, the cosign tool, you basically use cosign to produce the public-private keys. And then you can sign your artifact or your piece of code that you've written. And then this part, the Fulcio, it's like the root CA account. So it's like a certificate authority. What it does is it gives you like free certificate that's like pretty short-lived. And once you have your code signed and everything, it pushes to this record transparency log. You can think about this log as like a tamper-resistant ledger, kind of. So you can, and then if Visa wants to verify whether this code is coming from where it was claiming to, all you have to do is just run the single command and say cosign so-and-so, and it'll tell you that, okay, this is verified. So there are great tools out there, everything free, that you can just use to make sure that the components that you are using within your systems are good to use. There was one more thing that I want to mention, is about SALSA. So it's supply chain levels for software artifacts. As a part of the federal agency's law that they've passed, they want everybody to adhere to a supply chain security framework. Most of them are covered if you follow SALSA. So this is essentially a framework. It was initially developed by Google, and the aim was to have security and transparency and integrity for all their software artifacts that they were building, because they wanted to make sure that there's some level of assurances. So now it is published, and many people use this framework. What it means is there are 4 levels, okay? So there are three main tracks that they put this across. One is source, one is build, and the last one is called provenance. Provenance is basically, they say that you are verifying all the components, and you have to tell that every component and you have to make sure that the information within that component is right. That information is mainly about where is it stored, what it is, how is it stored. So where, what, and how. So that is what provenance is. So these are different levels of SALSA that a company can achieve. So it basically means if you have some kind of build repository, you are at level 1. If you ensure that every component is signed, so like if you're using SIG-Store for every component that you're assigning something or a similar tool, then you are level 2. If you're ensuring that all your builds are isolated, you're level 3, and so on. So that's why if, let's say, Visa wants to work with LASCON and LASCON say, hey, we're SALSA level 3 certified, it gives a lot of confidence that, okay, I think they know what they're doing, so I don't probably have to worry a lot from supply chain perspective. And that is the benefit of having these frameworks and being compliant with frameworks. I also saw there was a tool where it was very interesting. I was just trying to see how to get SALSA level 3 certified or 4 certified. And it was amazing. There are certain tools. All you have to do is just click buttons and say, I want to enroll in this. And you just say yes, 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 toggle few buttons, and it says, yeah, you can be level 4 certified. So it's interesting. There was a tool called Harness. I don't think it's open source, but you can check that out just for reference. It's called Harness, HARNESS. Okay, so now that you've have SALSA framework in your mind, there are a few things that, actually 2 important things that you want to ensure is there in your SBOM. One is the source information, because you remember I talked about you need to have self-attestation of your components. So you need to say that I got this component from this particular source. So example, if I'm using this component, I'm saying that this particular Git library is coming from this URL from this main branch. So always ensure that you have that source for your component written inside your SBOM. If you look into dependency track tool, there is a separate tab for source where you can just go and just type it out that this is coming from so-and-so place. And the second important one is having the service information. So service information is more like this component, where is this component actually being used in your application. So example is like this particular component is being used by authentication server, that is service that is running in production, right? Apart from that, there's another use case which I actually got to know yesterday. And that is, this is a great place if you want to store information about your APIs. So when it comes to APIs, sometimes what you can scan through the tools is probably which API service it's calling. So, or maybe if you scan the code and look for the get post method, you can find, okay, this is a particular URI for an API. You can have that information, but sometimes you have to do traffic monitoring to understand which all API calls are there. So you can include all of that information in this service place. So from here, your SBOM will identify which APIs your components might be calling, and then it can be listed or tagged with NVD's vulnerability, like if there is anything that happens to that API's component, if you know what I mean. And last, again from licensing perspective, and this is more for open source codes, when you're using open source, ensure that you have the license information as well, because you don't want to get into legal issues. So it's more or less always there, but if it isn't, then ensure that you have this information as well. Okay, lot of things. I try to cover a lot of things, but let's just collate what I just said, and let's just take the same use case that we've been talking about. So let's say we had this LASCON app, and I wanted to make sure that, from supply chain security perspective, I'm good. What do I do? Everything that I just talked about. So the LASCON application people, whoever is creating it, they need to produce an SBOM. You can use any existing SCA tools, or you can use tools like Cyclone DXCLI. Ensure that the SBOM that you're storing is right, not tampered with, integrity and authenticity is in place. So you can have all the components being signed by SIG-Store. The SBOM itself can be signed by SIG-Store as well. Add the source and all that good information. Upload that into any tool, either your script or in your dependency track. And then track vulnerabilities. Again, if you want to do it manually, have a script, keep it running, and you can do that. Or use tools like dependency track again. Again, this is also an open source tool. And then harden your build pipeline. So use frameworks like Salsa. But do not forget to keep your auditors trying to dig hole into your application, because that is when you might discover something new that you don't know about. So at the end, I just want to say that supply chain is essential. So I don't think there is any way out and you can say, I think it's optional or I don't want to do it. It's probably important and required, but it is not as intimidating as it sounds. You can use simple tools, you can use simple frameworks to start building a program for yourself. And you have tools like SBOM, you have Salsa, you have Sixstore. There's so many good tools available for free for you, and you can just go and use it. So just take an action now if you haven't done already. And if you have any questions, that is all for today from my side. Any questions, anybody? Anything? Okay.
Thanks for the guidance for smaller companies. I'm actually curious, since you're at Visa, from the bigger company side, as you're consuming software now, you're asking all of your vendors,
Yes.
whether small, big,
Yes.
medium, to create all of this.
Yes.
You've got to process all this information and keep it up to date, do the verification
Yes.
of everything that's coming through.
Right.
Has that changed the build versus buy analysis within your enterprise? Because the cost ownership, right? The reason that the business is looking at commercial solutions or startup solutions, other stuff, is to externalize that cost. But now you have to take on greater costs because you're going to put these requirements on that small company. They're going to charge you more. So that changes your cost equation. And then you have to take on the additional TCO of managing all that SBOM data over time. And so has that baked into changing a little bit how you think about how much you build versus how much you buy?
That's an amazing question, actually. So I will tell you, I am not from the finance side. When any of those contracts come to my place, I only look from the security perspective. And what I am told is, if there are supply chain security requirement like collecting SBOMs, there is like no negotiation. Like it is like non-negotiable contract. So again, probably we are Visa, so we probably some sort of way have the ability to tell them that, hey, this is the right thing. Regarding cost, I don't think so, but I can double check and get back to you on that. But yeah. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Any other question, my Visa team? Okay.
So I have a question.
Yes, Arun.
So think of a situation, you have a service team. So
Okay.
Where we are working with visas and we send you this bomb.
Okay.
And first year you figured out that there is no dependency vulnerability.
Okay.
Second year you figure out that there is a vulnerability.
Okay.
But since it's a third party, you're not able to fix it. So
Okay.
what's the process do you guys follow? You guys stop them from there, or?
So first thing that you said, so I just want to correct you in the way you said that there's a vulnerability, but we're not able to correct it because, of course, it is based on a dependent component. But just to correct you, the vulnerability is not always in a particular component. It's always attached to a particular version of that component. And there are usually fixes available that, hey, you have to maybe patch that particular software.
I'm talking about things which is not available at all.
Like example.
Like 5 years back, I did this research.
Okay.
So when I was doing the research, what I figured out is I was actually integrating NVD database to get the exploit out.
Okay, awesome.
SBOM, licensing is not my area.
That's fine.
So I collected all the SBOMs. CV data is already available.
Okay.
So all the tools were providing that. But
Okay.
those were not tied to the exploit. So I merged exploit. Okay, you have
Okay.
these vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are associated with these exploits.
Okay.
So I was able to merge all of them.
Awesome.
But to prove to them that, okay, the reason why we did that is I want to prove to them that, okay, these are real things which you need to fix it, because you will
Fair
have
enough.
10,000 highs.
Yeah.
Which one do you prioritize? You have to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right? So that's the biggest challenge.
Correct.
When you go through this bomb.
Correct.
So when you figured out that, I also did some research where I figured out that some of these have dependencies.
Yes.
Where
lot of
some
dependencies.
versions where that dependency will have the dependency tree, right?
Yes, correct.
So if you're at the lower bottom or
Yeah.
second or third
Yeah.
lowest bottom,
Yes.
those libraries are not completely maintained. So
Fair
that's
enough.
the biggest challenge I've seen. So if those will not have like later versions or
Yeah.
no fixes available,
Right.
if you find a finding in that, that's the biggest challenge I've seen in
Yeah.
the market.
Yes.
So in those kind of situations, what do you guys usually do? Just curious to understand.
Yeah. And I think that's a real case problem because you already have worked on it. So thank you for that. How Visa work on it, I can tell you that. So for Visa, what happens is, let's say this is the situation. There is a dependency which doesn't have either any fix available, or it is maybe just this is no other option available. What Visa will create a finding. It is honestly on the startup or the vendor who is dealing with it, but you don't always have to patch that vulnerability. You have to contain it. So let's say that vulnerability says that it might. Because of this vulnerability, this might cause remote code execution. You have to somehow contain that. So make sure that the exploit that says that you can attack a particular organization by so and so, as long as even the vulnerability have that issue and you can somehow contain that, you're fine with it. You can continue using that component because even when you look at this SBOM list, right, you'll see there are high, low, mediums. And not everything is actually true. It's not like, oh, there are high or critical vulnerabilities, go fix it. Not always, because sometimes it is not, sometimes the application is like, we're not using it or we do not use it for particular purpose. So you of course discard it. So as long as you can say that this component is something that we are not using directly or will not impact our environment, then we are fine with it. If it is impacting, then I think you know the answer. We'll have to remediate it somehow because, there's an open, basically a backdoor from which an attacker can enter. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. The reason why I asked that question is, what motivated me was when Apache, right?
Yeah.
They moved from 2.2 to 2.4.
Yeah.
They made a lot of changes on their code base. So,
Okay.
but there were some vulnerabilities in 2.2 which was fixed in 2.4.
Okay.
But just upgrading from 2.2 to 2.4
Doesn't update all the
it
dependencies.
broke all of stuff.
Oh,
so
yeah.
that is why a lot
Yeah.
of times when we're advising to people
Yes.
when they're using it, hey, don't just go and upgrade it.
Yeah, and
Look
that's a great point.
Yeah, if you have a minor version which fixes the issue, go
Yeah.
with it. Don't go with a major version.
That is, actually I heard that point in one of the sessions, not specifically related to supply chain, but that person said just because something says that this is vulnerable and update it to a particular patch, don't just go and do it. Test it out, see that your functionalities are not broken, because ultimately we are doing this for the business. So make sure your functionalities don't break. But at the same time, if you do not upgrade it to some other version, give us an alternate form to ensure that this is contained or this is not really impacting your environment. So as long as we have that assurance, and I'm sure not just Visa, all companies understand that because they face that problem themselves as well. So as long as you can give some kind of assurance, you are fine. Yeah. So please don't blindly go and just click on fix update or fix. Just upgrade to a latest patch. Don't do that. Don't do that. I'm not saying that. But yeah.
There's a big cost associated with upgrading to a higher version.
I know that.
Ground, then the amount of resources you need to put. Just to give you an example, we have to have 5 to 6 engineers, and being me as a security person, I also went in as a developer, helped the team. So it took 1.5 years just to upgrade it because of a simple higher version patch. Which
I can understand.
Yeah, it was the mistake was we didn't upgrade to the minor version, we upgraded to the
latest version.
And by the time we figured out what exactly is going on, the developers were developing all the features because we were moving at a faster rate.
Yeah.
So by the time we figured out, it is through 3 months past.
Already there.
So to report, it was almost 1 year, 1.5 years work just to make it to a working state.
Absolutely. That's a very important point. Again, yeah. Don't just fix, just test and see if everything is working fine. But I'm sure that you were able to reverse and change it back to
we upgrade to 2.4.
Yeah, okay.
But
Okay.
with all the pain.
Yeah, I think that's a real life problem that happens almost every day. So I can understand that pain. But again, more or less, the lesson is you have to do something about supply chain. I know SBOM is a pain, and people say that there are like gigabytes of data that's just stored in SBOM. What do I do with it? You have to find the vulnerabilities associated. Otherwise, that data is of no use. And if you won't do it, somebody else will do it on your behalf, and then you go back and fix. But that's extra pain that's going to come to you just because you have signed a particular client. So,
I have one more comment. So
Yes.
why are you not including exploit into your...
You can. I'm not saying that you don't have
The reason
to.
why I'm asking, sorry.
Yeah.
So the reason why I'm asking that question is, now I'm not doing this research. It's like 5 years back, right?
You should publish
So,
your research.
Yeah, the reason why I was doing that was, like as you mentioned, right? SBOM contains a lot. Like
Yeah.
If you see the amount of data, like
Yeah.
especially if you're a smaller company,
Yeah.
you would have to prioritize what needs to be fixed.
Correct.
Fixing everything makes
You
sense.
can't.
Yeah. So how do you prioritize?
Yeah.
So having an exploit which could be exploited, but not all
Yes.
exploit will be applicable for you.
Yes.
And having that data also will help you out.
Yes, so exploits, Visa
that's
doesn't do
easy.
it.
Okay.
So Visa doesn't do it because we don't use these tools that I'm talking about. We use better tools, which gives us the exploit information as well. So, but this session was more or less intended to build that program up. So I'm not saying that you should have that exploit, but maybe once you have established all those earlier steps.
If you're a startup, right?
Yeah.
You're running an application.
Yeah.
So it's going to spit out probably 10,000
Yeah.
vulnerabilities.
Yeah,
Which
absolutely.
one do you prioritize? Like,
Yeah,
you need something
100%.
to work on it.
Yeah, and you can't just be like critical. Usually people start with criticals and then go to high and then go mediums and then lows. But if you have that exploit factor, then connect with Arun probably, and he can
it's
cover.
been,
No, that's
I worked in
amazing.
startup a long time back. So
Okay.
that time we did the same.
Oh,
But
okay.
that time none of the companies were splitting out exploit details.
Yeah.
So I built a program to get the exploit details because I had a challenge to prove to the management that, okay, the first question they'll ask you is, hey, you have 10,000, you are showing me.
Which one do you prioritize first?
Oh, 10,000 vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
All are highs.
Yeah.
Which one do you prioritize?
Yeah.
So you need to have some
Yeah.
weighing, right?
Yeah, I think you should let them know how do you actually build that exploit. Like you're here and they're here too. Yeah.
I think I had it in my GitHub repo, I think, the code but I use NVD itself. NVD database started to publish exploits.
Okay.
But before that, I was querying it from different databases.
Okay. So you said it's an NVD as well?
Now I think it is there.
Okay.
But that time I was pulling the data from NVD.
Okay.
From the NVD, I was getting all the details.
Okay.
And then there were a couple of open source tools, websites where they were having APIs to provide exploit details.
Okay.
So I will have to correlate everything. But the problem was, like if you take Black Duck or commercial tools, right?
Yeah.
They have their own in-house IDs.
Okay.
So that doesn't match with NVD.
Okay.
So you can't use it. You
Yeah.
have to use a tool which provides you and correlate with NVD. That was a challenge I had.
Wow.
So I have to take.
You
the
started
NVD.
way before. Yeah. Okay.
That was long time.
Okay. But that's good information. Okay.
Any other
So, yeah.
questions?
I think. Very good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.